Our story begins in the middle of a vast field of wheat and other tall grasses. Fall approaches, so the grass is starting to turn gently orange and brown. And in the center of this field, there is the largest oak tree you've ever seen. Some might say the largest oak tree in the world. And it stood alone, majestic against the sky. Now this was not your typical oak tree, for on this oak tree, the leaves were alive. Each branch had leaves which would talk and sing and make jokes and befriend each other. These leaves had families, fathers and sons. These leaves told stories they loved, and they were very human as a leaf can be. And for a time unknown, this tree existed and these leaves lived happily. They would enjoy the feeling of the golden fall sun on them. They would rejoice in the sounds of the wind gently rustling the leaves and tickling them. They would relax when the rain gently pattered down upon them, cleaning off all the dirt and pollen from the day. Now, on this tree, there was one family of leaves that we're going to take a closer look at. There was a mother and a father, 2 twins, and then an older sister. And this older sister is what our story is going to be about. Her name was Crelia. She was a very brave, almost cantankerous little girl. She had always hoped to get off of her tree and go exploring. But as you can imagine, the life of a leaf is not one that is conducive towards exploring the ground or exploring the air. And so over time, she grew to be content living on her tree. Until one day, Crelia noticed dark, black clouds on the horizon. These were not the type of clouds that she had ever seen before. These clouds seemed to roll and boil and shift ominously. Flashes of lightning illuminated them faster and faster as they got closer. A gentle breeze turned into a mighty wind and turned into hurricane-force winds. Drops of water turned into a deluge and eventually turned into hail. The wind grew so intense that she and her family could do nothing but cover their ears, duck, and hide. She heard screaming. Leaves were getting blown off the tree. She heard their yells as they went, "Ah!" into the distance. And she thought, "Oh no, not my family, please not my family." And then her father went, "Crelia!" he cried. Then her mother, and then her 2 baby twins, the brother and the sister. And soon, all she could do was close her eyes, cry, cover her little leaf ears until the storm had passed. After a time, the storm eased and the rain stopped. The night turned into morning and the chirping of the birds came. She opened her eyes and what she saw horrified her. Down below in the field, the grass was bent and gnarled and pushed over. There was the indentations in the dirt below where massive amounts of water had flooded and left ruts. She looked around her tree, her beautiful, fabulous home, and saw that it was devoid of any other leaves, only her. She screamed for her mother, "Mom!" Nothing. She screamed for her father, "Daddy!" Nothing. She screamed for her brother and sister, nothing. She screamed for anyone, for any of the leaves, for anyone or anything that could help her, nothing. She was scared, you might even say horrified. She was all alone on her tree, and the thoughts kept going through her mind of what if I have to live here alone forever? So she struggled. She shook about, trying to loosen her stem. Nothing. She kicked and swayed and yelled and grunted and turned and yanked her arms around, tried to reach up on her stem and pull her down, and nothing. And finally, she just felt inside of her a sadness and an anger coming up. So she grabbed onto her stem, pulled as hard as she could while kicking at the same time, and the leaf fell. She screamed. She had no idea what was going to happen. She was swinging on the wind, and she yelled at first. She screamed, and she asked for help. But then, as she didn't fall to the ground, she started laughing and whooping because it was so fun. "Woo!" she said, enjoying the ride as she gently fell to the ground. Once she was on the ground, she once more called to her family. But there was nothing. It seemed there was no one around. So for a time she found a small stone and she sat on it with her head in her hands. She was no tracker, she was no hunter, no explorer, no hero. How was she, a lone leaf, not even full grown, supposed to find her family or the rest from her tree village? She didn't know, so she sat. She thought about all the things she would miss. She thought about her father's smile, her mother's laugh, the annoying but also amusing energy of her little twin brother and sister. She looked around. She saw the damage the storm had done, but then she noticed something. The grass. It was all blown over in one direction. She thought, that's the way the wind blew, and thus that will be where my family is, for they would have been blown with the wind. She gave herself a pat on the back, stood up, and she started marching. So she started walking, always following the direction that the grass was pointing. On the way, she passed a cricket who was sitting idly playing his beautiful song, and she asked him if it had seen her family. It merely looked at her and shook its head no. She kept walking, and she saw a grasshopper to whom she asked the same question, and it too said, I don't know. I've never even seen a walking, talking leaf. And on she went, until finally she arrived at a small stream. This stream seemed to be flowing quite gently as the waters of the storm had begun to abate. And so she thought to herself, I'm sure I can make it across. However, being a leaf that was only ever living on a tree, she did not understand how light she was and how well leaves floated on water. So she took 2 steps into the middle of the stream and immediately got caught up in its torrent. It whisked her away down winding curves and over small waterfalls, and once again, at first she screamed in terror, and then in joy, for it appeared she liked exciting situations. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity trapped on this endless stream, it slowed down and she found herself on the beach of a small pond, washed up on the shore. She looked around and she saw old dried up leaves, not the kind that was alive like her, crinkled grass, small bugs crawling about. And on top of a rock, she saw a giant old toad. She walked to the toad and introduced herself. I'm Crelia, she said. Ribbit, said the frog. And Crelia said, what's your name? And the frog said, Ribbit. And she said, well, okay, but what's your name? And the frog said, my name is Ribbit. How many times do I have to say it? And Crelia chuckled a bit to herself and said, well, it's nice to meet you. Hey, have you by any chance seen any more leaves like me? I'm looking for my family and for my village. And the frog merely said to herself, I haven't seen them, but I have heard tell of something strange going on up in the hills. And Crelia said, what do you mean? What kind of strangeness? And the frog said, well, word is there's a wolverine with sharp, ferocious claws and teeth like blades, the kind that could tear through any animal's hide, that has taken some prisoners. And when I heard it, I didn't believe it, for the stories go that these prisoners were walking, talking, singing, living leaves. And Crelia said, my family, that must be my family. And the frog said, why yes, it must be. Well, off with you now. I must get my beauty rest. And Crelia thanked the frog for the help and looked at the hills. They were quite a ways in the distance, and she did not know how far she would have to walk. So she decided to do a little preparation. She went under a pine tree and got the sharpest, pointiest pine needle that she could imagine. And it was stiff enough that she could use it as a blade or a sword in the event she needed to protect herself. She found a flat rock, the kind that would be perfect for a skipping stone that had a little outcropping that allowed her to use it as a handle, and she took this as a shield. And then she found herself a beautiful spot under a tree and slept until the morning. When morning came and the birds were chirping and the sun warmed the skin of her leaf, she walked up the hill and through a field, passing grasshoppers and butterflies, whom she was all polite and said hi to. She walked through some woods, the kind of deep, dark woods where you can barely see the sky. She saw foxes and bats and other creatures flitting about. She decided not to say hi to them because they were very big and intimidated her, so she crept quietly as she could through the forest. She climbed up a rocky outcropping, which was quite the challenge for her small legs, but eventually she made it. And finally, she crested a hill, and as she did so, on the wind, she heard a sound that was unmistakable to her. It was the lilting melody of the way leaves talk. She couldn't make out what it was saying, but she knew that it was one of her own. So she walked towards where she heard the sound, and over time it became more and more clear, and it started sounding like more than one leaf. Until finally, she crept up to the edge of a wooded area and saw an old barn that looked like a storm, perhaps the most recent storm, perhaps one from long ago, had knocked this building down and left all the wood and planks into a dilapidated mess. But somehow this mess had left a structure. It looked almost like a mound made of wood, and from inside of there, she heard leaves talking and crying and mumbling. They did not sound happy. So she waited, she listened, and she watched, but she saw nothing. And so she crept inside, quietly and quickly as she could. And there she saw 5 metal cages filled with leaves. Hundreds, maybe even thousands of them. These were the leaves from her village. She recommended Old Pop, the oldest leaf she knew, who told the best stories. She recognized the voice of a woman from across the tree who she had never seen, but who she had heard sing on many nights. And finally, she recognized her father, and she ran over to the cage and said hello to him. And he cried, and his mother cried, and she cried. And they said, "You must leave, Crelia. This creature, it's got us prisoner. We are no match for it. Leave while you still can." And Crelia said, "I am not afraid of whatever is coming. You have no idea the adventure I've been on." She heard quite the growl, and she heard paws stomping on the dirt ground. And so she exited out of the structure, the wooden mound, for lack of a better term, as quickly as she could, and went back to the tree at the edge of the field that she had watched. And she saw a creature that terrified her, stomping. It had sharp teeth, thick, rough, rugged fur. It walked on 4 legs and had claws almost as long as its arms. It was fearsome, and it was ferocious. And when it got back inside the structure, she heard it say, "Are you ready to help me hunt yet? Or do I have to leave you in these cages forever?" And all she heard were the resigned murmurs of the leaves. And then the wolverine grew flustered and said, "Well, fine then." And it walked inside, and she could see it lay down, and before long, she could hear the sound of its snores. While she was waiting that night, a thought occurred to her. She had a weapon, and she had a shield. But she alone could not face the wolverine. But one thing that leaves did understand is that together they were stronger. Together, they could help a tree grow with a thick, strong trunk and mighty branches that reached towards the sky. And so, she built a sled out of small sticks, leaves, and rocks. And on top of that sled, she gathered every sturdy pine needle she could find. She gathered several shields made of stone. And she took an old leaf stem, not from a living leaf, mind you, and tied it to the sled. And the next morning, when the wolverine left the structure to go out to hunt, she rushed back with her sled, running towards the structure. Once inside, she went around to each cage and dumped as many pine needles in and a few of the stones as fast as she could. And when she was done, she stood in the middle of all the cages, and they said, "Crelia, what are we to do with these?" And she looked at them and said, "These are for fighting. We're not going to give up, and we're going to get you out of here." Most of the leaves only mumbled and murmured, for their hearts were consumed with fear. But she knew, because of the way she had been afraid when she first fell from the tree, and then lost her fear, that fear was just a feeling. If you could get used to the feeling of fear, and recognize that it couldn't hurt you, you could do anything. And she tried to impart this wisdom onto her leaf brethren, but listen, they did not. And unfortunately, while she was talking to them, she did not realize how much time had passed. And she knew, too late, that the wolverine had returned. It stomped in and looked at her and uttered a guttural, my, what have we here?" And it looked her up and down. She didn't have time to think. "I am Crelia, and I have come to free my people. Let them go now, and I will let you live." The Wolverine merely laughed. "I've trapped 1,000 leaves, and do you think one can stand against me? Come here." And she said, "You're too slow and stupid to catch me." And she could tell that this got it mad. And so she started walking, never standing still, moving around, weaving, and taunting it. And finally, she had taunted it so intensely that it leapt at her in a furious rage. And at the last moment, she dodged to the side, and it slashed at a cage with its fierce, sharp, long, deadly claws. And the bars of the cage parted, and there was a hole where the leaves could escape. Before the Wolverine could even notice this, Crelia was once again taunting how its fur smelled like poop, and how it was too stupid to even catch a single leaf, and too slow and old. And once again it dodged at her, and she had it slash another cage. And it was so consumed with rage and fury that it didn't realize that it was helping her until all the cages were slashed. "Come out now!" she yelled to the leaves, assuming they would see her and be emboldened by her defiance of the Wolverine and come to her aid. But they didn't. And so she did what she had to do. She dodged, she jumped, she taunted, hoping to keep it askew, to keep it from thinking while it was in its anger. And finally, it dived at her, and she just in the nick of time dove out of the way. And as she was diving, she was able to poke it right in the eye with a pine needle. Quickly, its clawed hands came gently up to its face so it wouldn't cut itself, and it roared and yelled and screamed in agony. And she walked forward, and every step she walked forward, it stepped backwards, for it could still see with its other eye. "Oh, I'm gonna destroy you for that," it said. And just like that, her father was standing next to her, pine needle in hand. "Like heck you will," he said, and they both started moving around, darting and diving at it. They were too quick for it to catch with its wounded eye. More leaves came. She saw her mother, her sister, her neighbors, until all of them that had a spear or a pine needle were surrounding the Wolverine. Now, one beautiful leaf started taunting the Wolverine with a fury of insults that she couldn't believe. And it got so mad, it dove at this leaf even with its eye hurt. And when it dove, she jumped onto this leaf's back, flew into the air, flying gently until it got to its other eye and poked it again. And now it was laying on the ground with two eyes poked, and the other leaves came all around it. Poke, 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 until it screeched, "Stop! I'll let you go!" And they kept poking it. "What do you want?" it yelled. Crelia signaled for her brethren to back off and said, "We want you to leave these parts. We want you to go somewhere far away. And we want you to know that if we ever hear hide nor hair of you speaking ill to a leaf, let alone attacking one, we will descend upon you like the fury of 1,000 suns." And the Wolverine tried to blink and tried to look at her with its eyes down, and it knew it was defeated, and it grunted in frustration and then slowly hobbled away. Once the Wolverine was gone, all the leaves started cheering and singing, and they lifted Crelia up and said, "Hip, hip, hooray!" And on hooray, they threw her in the air, and she slowly fell back down to the earth. Now, you might think that was the end of the story, but here's a question for you. What happens to a leaf when it's no longer on a tree? It can't grow its own tree. Well, I can tell you what happened to these leaves. They stayed in this wooden structure, and they improved it and made it beautiful and built rooms and decorated it. And they built better weapons stronger than pine needles, and they patrolled the forest, Crelia always at their head. And whenever they found some misdeed or some creature treated unfairly, they rushed to its aid and assured that justice was served. Far and wide spread the legend of Crelia and her merry band of leaves, to where they had a reputation for as far as they could ever walk. And soon, they were known for helping. They would help far and wide, and they were heroes. And that is the end of tonight's story. I hope very much you enjoyed it. There's 2 lessons you could learn from this one. First, fear is just a feeling. It's okay to feel fear, but you don't have to not do something because of fear. And if you can do something through fear, there's not much in life that can stop you. And the second is anger, while natural, stops you from thinking and seeing clearly. Think about how easily this Wolverine would have been able to defeat just a bunch of leaves had it not gotten so angry it lost its mind and freed them all. Anyway, I would like to tell you, Alden, I love you more than the sun and the moon and the stars and all of infinity combined times 2. I hope you have an excellent night, and for anyone else who is here, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.